I suppose the biggest news for the National Football League is the news that has transcended sport, because the activities that O.J. Simpson was allegedly involved in June of 1994 became the thing for which he is best known. And I kind of struggled with this at first, because you always want to show respect for the recently departed, primarily for their family members. You want to extend the appropriate condolences. It's a difficult time in anyone's life to go through the experience of the passing on of a loved one. But it's impossible to tell the story of O.J. Simpson without telling the story of the thing for which he is best known. For all the accolades, and he has many, from the National Football League, the bronze bust in Canton is just one of the many things he accomplished and earned through his career on the field. His work as a broadcaster, which was phenomenal, great natural charisma. Everybody loved OJ. Of all the people that would make that turn, if we had known it was coming and we had a chance to pick one member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame who would kill two people, he probably would have been the last name, or one of the last names picked at the time. Everybody loved OJ. To have that spin the way that it did in June of 1994, and it was a riveting experience, and there are more and more people who weren't alive when any of that happened, from the murders all the way through the verdict in his trial. That is still the number one thing he's known for, Charean. And it eventually dawned on me after wrestling with it for a few hours, because Kristen Coleman reached out and wanted to do, say, hey, do you want to do a video? And she's very good about prompting me, because I get caught up in everything I'm doing. Hey, do you want to do a video about O.J. Simpson passing? It's like, I kind of don't, because I really don't know what I want to say. So I needed a few hours to think it over, and I finally arrived at a very simple spot. It can't be disrespectful to talk about the murders at a time when the murderer has died. It's disrespectful to the victims to act like it never happened and to not talk about it. And look, I know there's going to be people out there who say he was acquitted. He did it. I don't care that he was acquitted. He did it. A civil jury found that he did it, and anyone with common sense that paid any attention to the trial, or the excellent documentary, the 10-part documentary from 2016-17 time frame, he did it. A jury found he did it under the lower standard in the civil context in a wrongful death lawsuit. That's the name of the specific type of case that you bring against someone who killed someone else, a family member. Whoever it is that has the power of that person's estate brings the wrongful death case. He was found liable for the killings of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown Simpson. Nicole Brown Simpson, obviously his ex-wife, not Ron Goldman, the guy who was in the worst possible place at the worst possible time. So that's how I resolved it, Charean. I've had a night to sleep on it, and I'm not going to pull any punches on this. The man who killed two other people died this week. That's the story. He killed them. He did it. And somehow is very easy, he had the money to go out and buy the best possible defense lawyers who muddied the waters sufficiently to get the jury to ignore the evidence, and the prosecution botched the case. That's how he got away with it, and that's how it came to be that when he died, it wasn't behind bars.
I read several stories yesterday, Mike, and one of them was interesting. It talked about O.J. Simpson had a quote in there about he was afraid that when he died, he was going to be remembered for his Hertz commercial rather than what he did on the field. And obviously, that's not at all what he's remembered for, and is on the field, unfortunately, is not what he's remembered for either. It is, as you said, the killings of two people. And I don't know, Mike, people don't know about the Hertz commercial, obviously, a lot of people, because they weren't alive then, but it was a huge commercial. You'd run through the airport and leap over, luggage and all sorts of things in the airport. And it was a great commercial, and one of the most memorable commercials, I think, when we were probably growing up. But I don't know, a lot of people don't realize how big of a deal that was. It's one of those moments in your life, and there are only a few of those ever, that you remember exactly where you were when it happened. And I remember exactly where I was on the Bronco chase, the slow chase, because the Rockets were playing game 5 of the NBA finals. And I wanted to watch the Rockets win. And you had the slow speed chase on as the NBA finals are playing, you also had a little inset picture of the chase. What's going to happen with OJ as he runs from the police in this slow speed chase. And if you were alive, you still remember that the driver was Al A.C. Cowlings. You don't forget that. And then, you remember the trial. You remember where you were when they came out with the verdict in Los Angeles. And it was a stunning, stunning verdict. And I think we all reacted probably the same way. I can't believe he got off. He got away with this. And that's kind of where we are, Mike. And unfortunately, we're not talking about what he did on the football field. And he was great. He was truly one of the greats of all time. And it was incredible. And you and I are about the same age, started to say the same age. We're 4 months apart. So you haven't had your birthday yet. But we would stay up on Monday nights to watch the halftime highlights by Howard Cosell. And you could always bet that O.J. Simpson was going to be in those halftime highlights because he was that good. He was an incredible football player on the field. And we're not talking about that today because of what happened after his football career.
Well, absolutely. And look, that's a direct product of his own choices, decisions, and actions. Whatever the excuse would have been, if he would have acknowledged that he did it and tried to fashion some defense based on temporary insanity or whatever, he didn't take responsibility. He never took responsibility. He almost took responsibility in that book, If I Did It. And the Goldman family yesterday, in issuing a statement following the passing of O.J. Simpson, mentioned both the civil verdict and If I Did It as the basis for the acknowledgement that he had killed Ron Goldman. I mean, think about how they must have felt at the time and how they have felt for the last 30 years. As I mentioned earlier, Ron Goldman in the worst possible place at the worst possible time. There was a history of brutal domestic violence between O.J. Simpson and Nicole Brown Simpson. We became aware of that in the weeks and months after the murders. Ron Goldman was the closest thing to an innocent bystander. He was bringing the glasses. Remember that part of the story? Yeah. He was bringing sunglasses to Nicole Brown Simpson, and he just happened to be there when O.J., with a knife, killed them both in a frenzied rage. And that, if you haven't seen the documentary, the 10-part documentary, I highly recommend it. I already believed he did it. It helped me understand how and why the prosecution blew it, how they didn't convert overwhelming evidence, DNA evidence that was clearly and indisputably his, connecting him. And there's no other reasonable basis to think there was anybody else who would have showed up and butchered these two people for no apparent reason. It wasn't a robbery. It wasn't a hit on Ron Goldman. There was no suggestion that anybody else out there wanted these two people to be dead. So the whole thing was a tragedy, remains a tragedy, and I've always felt badly for the Ron Goldman family because they never got justice. The only silver lining for them came from the fact that the civil verdict of $33 million, which I think I saw a quote from Fred Goldman, Ron's father, recently, that number as of a couple of years ago was up to like 90 million plus with interest because he hasn't paid it. But the thinking is he was selling his own sports memorabilia on the side so he wouldn't have to turn that money over to the court process, to Fred Goldman and the families of his victims. And that's what led to, one domino after another, that weird heist where he was trying to take back memorabilia that he believed had been stolen from him. And, they do it with guns and they bust in and yada, yada, yada. He did 9 years in Nevada as a result of that. Now, there's a perception that was payback, that was just an effort to make sure this guy goes behind bars for some period of time because he already should be behind bars. But He got convicted through the normal court process. I doubt that everyone, ignored the law, ignored their oath, ignored their duty just to make sure that O.J. Simpson finally went to jail. If the facts are what they were alleged to be, and he had the fair and full process to try to prove otherwise, he wouldn't have gone to prison if he was able to show with reasonable doubt that he was not legally guilty. So he ultimately did the 9 years, and I don't think that happens if he isn't being chased around by Fred Goldman for whatever semblance of justice you can get from trying to collect on a multi-million-dollar civil verdict. Just so the guy who killed your son is reminded, and there's never a night that he doesn't go to bed, and there's never a morning that he doesn't wake up without having this massive financial liability hanging over him. I mean, I applaud Fred Goldman. He's the kind of father I'd want to have if my life was taken from me at an early age, fighting for me after I'm gone. And I'd like to think I'd be that kind of father if something like that happened to my son, that I would never, ever, ever stop seeking justice from the man that I was convinced killed him. Ever. Nothing would ever stop me from doing it. And, yes, the passing of O.J. Simpson creates a trauma for his family, but it reopens the wound for the families of his victims. So, again, there's going to be people who are upset about me because I'm speaking as if O.J. Simpson definitely did it. Well, hey, sorry, folks. If you want to get triggered, get triggered. He did it. And I'm not going to pull punches about it, and I'm not going to tiptoe around it. He did it, and my thoughts now have turned to the people who didn't get to live a full life and didn't get to die of natural causes because of what he did in June of 1994.
Mike, you have those things where people say, who are 3 people that you'd love to have dinner with? And O.J. Simpson was always on my list, and people thought that was weird. But I think as a reporter, and you as an attorney and a reporter, you think you're good enough that you could trick him into giving the answer that he really did it. And I always thought that. I would love to have dinner with him and just start peppering him with questions and thinking that I could go, aha, you admitted it. And, probably wouldn't have happened because he never did come out and say that definitively that he did do it. But I always thought that I could get that answer from him being a good questioner, Mike. And I never interviewed O.J. Simpson. He stole my pen one time as a kid. I was trying to get his autograph when he was playing with the 49ers against the Cowboys, and he stole my pen. So he's also a thief as well.
Oh, gosh, he never was prosecuted for petty larceny for stealing Charean's pen. I vaguely remember hearing that story at some point in the past. Now, look, if you're going to give me the opportunity to have dinner with 3 people, I'm sorry, I'm not going to agree with you. O.J. Simpson was not making the list. He was not. I was not going to burn one of the spots on him. I want to be able to enjoy the dinner. I'm not treating this as an exercise in trying to interrogate a guy that I already know is guilty. I don't need him to confess. I already know he's guilty. So I'd have made other choices. I have a vivid recollection, and the date was December 16, 1973. That was the first full season that I was all in for the National Football League. I discovered it in December of 1972 with the Immaculate Reception, and it was December 16 of 1973 that he rushed for 200 yards, exactly 200 yards against the New York Jets to get to 2003 for the season. And that was just a big deal. I mean, for folks who grew up when we did, O.J. Simpson was the guy. He was the star of stars in the National Football League and burned bright for 4 or 5 years. But that's a long time when you're a kid. He was the center of the NFL consciousness at the time that I first discovered it. And he was rivals with Franco Harris, rivals with Chuck Foreman in the 1975 season when Chuck Foreman had his best year and O.J. had a great year. They were going back and forth chasing Gale Sayers' single-season touchdown record. I remember that vividly. And O.J. Simpson was the guy who was established. And look, it kind of fell off quickly for him, and he ended up being traded to the San Francisco 49ers, who gave up what became the first overall pick in the draft to the Buffalo Bills, who squandered it on Tom Cousineau. That's a different story altogether. But, yeah, O.J. Simpson was one of the great players of the 1970s. Short list, one of the top players of all time. But But when you kill two people, that stuff tends to get obscured.
He was the juice, and he was running behind the electric company, and it was truly electric. And we should point out, Mike, that they played 14 games back then. Not 16, not 17. They played 14. He averaged 143 yards per game. So it was a pretty incredible season and a pretty incredible career for what he did. Won 4 rushing titles. I mean, this guy was truly one of the greatest running backs of all time. After what happened, I would have been curious, and it got them off the hook a little bit. But let's say he was convicted of murder. Would the Heisman have taken away his Heisman? And please give Reggie Bush his Heisman back. But would they have taken away the Heisman? And would the Pro Football Hall of Fame have kicked him out of the Hall of Fame if he had been convicted of those 2 murders? I do have that question, and I do wonder that often.
I doubt that either would have happened. They get so caught up in their rules and their bylaws and precedents and whatnot. I mean, come on. They surely there are people with common sense at the Heisman Trust, and surely there are people with common sense at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And I've made this argument in the past because the pushback is, well, if we start down that path, then who else gets taken out? And there are plenty of guys who were put in who did bad things that we knew or should have known about or could have known about if the media was like it is today, when it was back when these guys got voted in or back when they were playing and this stuff got brushed under the rug and nobody knew about it, nobody asked the tough questions, and the media wasn't swarming all over the place. I mean, look, I don't care about any of that. What I care about is in 2005, we went through the Hall of Fame, and my son was 8 years old, and I had to hurry and buy the O.J. Simpson bust because I didn't want to go down the whole rabbit hole of who that is and what he did after his playing career ended. So I would have supported all along removing him from the Hall of Fame, and I suspect the Hall of Fame would have found a way to stick-handle their way around not removing the bust. And part of my evidence for coming to that conclusion, Charean, is the statement that was issued yesterday by the Hall of Fame. And look, I want to make sure anybody in Canton realizes these aren't Charean's thoughts because she's one of the voters. I'm not, so I can say what I want to say. Not that it would stop me anyway if I was a voter, which is one of the reasons why I'm not and never will be. But they sent out a statement yesterday with all of his accolades, mentioning his broadcasting and acting career after he was done playing, so post-playing career stuff wasn't off limits. But there was no mention whatsoever in the lengthy statement from the Pro Football Hall of Fame about the murders. And again, you don't disrespect the murderer by mentioning the murders when he dies. You disrespect the victims by failing to mention the murders when the murderer dies. Before we go to break, one last point that I want to make, just to emphasize the brilliance on the football field and just to show the conflict that so many people are having now, especially people who grew up when we did. That 2,003 yards in 14 games, I did the math and checked it twice because it didn't seem right. To equal that in a 17-game season, that rate, you need 2,432 rushing yards. Those 3 extra games at 143 each, they turn into 2,432. So that's never going to happen. Never going to happen, ever, in today's National Football League, unless the game all of a sudden goes back to run the ball, and you find somebody who is durable enough to run the ball to the clip of 143 yards per game for 17 games. I think it's safe to say it's not going to happen. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.